Greetings everyone, or maybe just myself. Hi. These tips are my findings for representation in Blockbusters. I truly didn't think I'd have it all here in front of me, and though some of it is upsetting to be sure, it's truly been a labor of love. I'm often told I think too much about blockbuster films, but that's because what's beneath these admittedly archetypal and simply structured films at times is space for vast creative expression and inspiration for viewers. Blockbuster films is admittedly a broad term. With the state of the industry right now, it is often relegated to superhero flicks. Depending on the source, that may come from shades.
The real question is, what are those?
As a child, these cinematic icons somewhat embarrassingly taught me the kind of person I wanted to be. Like most Gen Z diet film bros making video essays, the MCU's Infinity Saga partially cultivated my passion and understanding of film as a language and art form. From my playground days to my high school graduation. It was good back in 2019, I swear. But as an adult, my viewpoint has been less glamorous. It's been hard to ignore tropes and trends that cut deeper than stale storytelling. Problems that have existed as long as blockbusters, as long as filmmaking. It's clear what type of people are viewed as heroes in film and those who are not. Class is not a dividing factor, neither is age. Instead, it's people who have been routinely marginalized. People of color, women, and queer people. And let me take this moment to say that this is certainly not all-encompassing. Namely, representation of disabled individuals, physical and mental, should improve in quality and quantity. Moreover, performers and characters who exist at the intersections of these identities are even less represented than those with only one of these identifiers, and they certainly deserve to be represented too. And I won't argue that this is a new finding at all, it's not. This is a topic that has been studied to death, but what I think we're missing is an evaluation of the broad biases in mainline films, the cinema of raising our youth and defining American contemporary media, from the discussions that we have, the values we uphold, and the way that we view who we are. Even in the past decade, there have been unignorable strides in film representation. We're in an age where film lovers recognize the impact blockbusters can have on mainstream audiences. And as such, we've seen increased liberal values injected into the stories and marketing of major franchises. These attempts have received both acclaim and disdain, and been perceived to be benevolent and manipulative in seemingly equal measure. At face value, many might say that the issue is diminishing. And obviously, they're right. There's clearly very little place in the most mainstream of films for explicitly derogatory content. The internet has not only forged strong communities of marginalized people, but has also given them an avenue to effectively protest content that hurts them. And this all has brought the issues of diversity and representation into the foreground. But what it feels like no one is talking about is the fact that diverse voices are quantitatively diminishing from our theatrical content. UCLA's annual Hollywood Diversity Report, released back in March, reveals just as much. These percentages show the number of lead actors who are minorities or female to those who are white or male, respectively. The pandemic years, 2020 to 2021, are erased from the 2023 report because they also count the number of films released on streaming services. But regardless of how you view it with or without the pandemic years, we see an obvious drop in diverse voices. The numbers for overall cast diversity are no better, and it's even worse for queer and disabled people. In 2019, the German broadcasting site DW published a study counting the appearance of tropes within Oscar-eligible films up to that point. And with a dataset of 6,637 films, they created a dataset of 8,821 tropes spanning from Chekhov's gun, a title drop.
So that's it? What, we some kind of Suicide Squad?
Black guy dies first, and spicy Latina. Respectfully, trying to comprehend these results is abysmal. The graphs don't have marked y-axes, and proportions really make everything look skewed. These stupid boxes of different sizes based on frequency are arbitrary and dumb. I mean, the quantification of representation is already as fickle as it is, but they're truly not making it any easier. Obvious from the data is the fallout of these outright discriminatory depictions like scary black man, blackface, yellow apparel, and broken English speaking. But Germans are still highly represented as highly Hitler to some degree, and British are correctly labeled as maniacal, devilish bastards. What the data does not show are the number of quality depictions for these groups of people, because for some underrepresented communities, there's been pseudo-renaissances, an evident push for more diverse stories. Certain identities have been fast to receive this treatment. Black people, women, and AAPI folks have seen an increased amount of positive representation on screen. And notably, some of these films have entered the cultural zeitgeist as defining pieces of media. But I find it a pseudo-renaissances, one, because of the drop in depictions that we've seen recently, and two, because we still see depictions of marginalized characters that reinforce the ideas that have held them down since Hollywood has existed. Despite not being blatant, they're so harmful. A pitch-perfect example of a character who exists at this intersection for being defining and polarizing is this defining shot, set as the climax of the bombastic first trailer of Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens, was a cultural moment. No longer was the galaxy defined solely by the perspective of white people. For as genre-defining, revolutionary, and epic as Star Wars is, it's low-key problematic at times. Leia in the studded swimsuit, Lando the suave, swindling person of color who, mind you, betrays our white protagonist, and Jar Jar Binks' similarities to black minstrels from his cartoony movements and dialect. Even if you rightfully love characters like Princess Leia and Lando for their iconicity to science fiction lore, or even just their excellent performances, it's okay to acknowledge that some parts of their portrayals leave a bad taste in your mouth. Recognizing Star Wars' old misgivings doesn't even make the characters or films worse in hindsight. It's just the Jedi way. Also, the first 2 acts of Return of the Jedi do that on its own.
What's going on?
I don't know.
Toxicity is nothing unique for massive fandoms with legacy characters.
Half-witted, scruffy-looking nerf herder.
Who's scruffy looking?
James Bond, Marvel and DC superheroes, and Disney princesses are just a few multi-iterative characters where casting decisions and rumors about protagonists being a POC has sparked online outrage. Star Wars is likely at the top of the list of franchises certain people are hatefully defensive over, and the outrage illustrates the problem. Film as an artistic media is relatively young, not far removed from harmful caricatures initially used to satirize, belittle, and overlook the lived experiences of POC. Depictions morph from overtly racist to shallow stereotypes to where we are today, able to be the main characters of stories. POC protagonists have often been used to boldly stand against oppressive narratives, but not all are written equally. These characters are frequently placed in supporting roles to the white lead, and in the context of an ensemble, as an unfortunate token or singly defined person of color, usually black, that stops the diversity from looking completely unrealistic. Even more unfortunate is when characters are written to purely, and most likely poorly, represent their cultural identity.
It's always good to have an extra body, just in case one of us gets kidnapped for ransom, is turned into a shipping container, and is made to eat only leaves and gas receipts.
Though Star Wars' casting of John Boyega, Oscar Isaac, and Daisy Ridley, similar sentiments go for women, but we'll get there, was met with some vitriol, post-displaying the online support, cosplay, fan art, everything under those means of Tatooine, made it emphatically clear that people were willing, ready to see these characters. Because more than ever, they looked like us. I always had a connection to Finn. As a black man myself, after the series' middling use of darker skinned heroes in the past, having a black dude front and center, looking powerful and badass with a lightsaber was transformative. I don't know if any celebrities want this to be their praise, but watching The Force Awakens projected on a theater wall finally made me comfortable with having a big black nose. Here's my face smushed with John Boyega's that I made for my VFX class. We really are well oxygenated fellows. It wasn't a thought that I had during the trailers or build up for this movie either, but as I watched the movie, I saw my nose on that black boy holding a lightsaber. For a second, those memories of me playing lightsabers with my dad weren't just a fantasy. But with later films, we were in for a rude awakening.
You said, I'm going to quote you, what I say to Disney is, do not market a black character as important and then push them aside. I feel like they heard you.
Yeah, no, but as they should, even if you want to remove race out of it, just from a business perspective, don't tease no black. You know what that does to black people? You know how you guys got everybody motivated around Black Panther? Don't tease no and market no Black Panther, market a black actor and switch him, babe.
Switch it, yeah.
You don't do it with white actors. You don't do it. You don't.
In episode 8, Finn takes on a decidedly more supportive role in the story, only to be sentenced to near irrelevance in the final film, where he has to fight to get out even a few lines.
Ray, I never told you Ray.
The lazy suggestion that Finn might be force sensitive serves to undercut character development in prior movies, and quite honestly, keep him busy during the rest of the plot. It all feels insulting. Finn's diminishing value is juxtaposed by his co-lead Rey's rise to fame. Trailers from The Force Awakens heavily foreshadowed Rey's connection to the Force in the Skywalker storyline. And simply scoffing at Rey's impact, like many hardcore fans do, I think is shallow-minded. Young girls have clearly responded very positively to her, and despite what you may say regarding her story, then Daisy Ridley plays her pretty infectiously. This is all to emphasize that I do not want to take away the worth of Rey's character regarding Star Wars lore or diversity, but criticism of subsequent Star Wars sequels seemingly led to less screen time and plot relevance for the largely POC ensemble cast and instead sole focus on Rey. The black man was thrown under the metaphorical AT-AT. Excuse my melodramatics. And regardless of any film's problems, the solution should never be to take away the few roles that are representing and engaging underrepresented people. And the stories of the Star Wars sequel cast eerily parallels that of the Justice League Cyborg as portrayed by Ray Fisher. The theatrical cut, taken over by resident boob pillow enthusiast Joss Whedon. Not to get ahead of myself or spoil this video essay, quote unquote series for you, but the problem is largely the people who have remained in power. Hey, I mean, past AI and bad pay, this is why we have to support the WGA and SAG-AFTRA. Anyway, the 2017 film is commonly regarded as inferior to Zack Snyder's Justice League, partially due to the initial sidelining of Cyborg. In the infamously dubbed Snyder Cut, we learned that the original vision was to place Victor Stone, aka Cyborg, at the heart of the movie. Ample time was devoted to Victor attempting to overcome the grief of his lost mother and body, and the MacGuffin mother boxes are linked closer to he and his father's relationship arc. Cyborg's tale in many ways makes up the emotional through line of the movie, surprising many fans. This pipe dream of a film is also a rare case in point for why and how worthy roles and performers can be overshadowed due to their identity. The decision to cut Cyborg's storyline was certainly fueled by producers disagreeing with Snyder's direction, and was capitalized on after the change of directors. Not wholly in a malicious way, I mean Snyder's initial vision would have never released due to its scale, but the optics of significantly reducing the story arc of the one black member of the Justice League are not great. It becomes even more shameful now that we've seen how many have connected with this version of the character. Hopefully this all goes to show that these are not isolated incidents, they're patterns, and they're patterns that pertain to more groups than just black people. And as a black person, let me say, I'm grateful we've seen as much of these characters as we have. There were so few black movie characters for me as a child, and even those that existed often weren't heroes or were shallow stereotypes. And now, well, even ironically mentioning Wakanda is kind of embarrassing. But it hasn't been the same rags to riches for other races. If it wasn't obvious from just watching movies, what the UCLA study makes apparent year by year is that not every actor has equal access to blockbuster roles depending on their race. AAPI folk have the runner-up highest depictions after black people. Films like Shang-Chi and Crazy Rich Asians use Western pop conventions infused with the stylings of Asian-produced films to create crowd-pleasing blockbusters, also rooted in the cultures of their characters. The popularity and critical acclaim of similar independent and foreign films in the US undeniably raises people's awareness of non-Western stylings of filmmaking. Latinos are right behind in representation, and though Lin-Manuel will not throw away his shot to get to the top of the box office, we're seeing loads of Latin and Hispanic talent get the starring light that they deserve. And with Blue Beetle getting decent reviews, maybe we'll see more Latino heroes soon. Middle Eastern characters have gone from faceless terrorists in countless action flicks
Holy shit!
to now being essentially erased from Western media. And similarly, indigenous people went from savage villains despite protecting their own land and old westerns to again completely erased. Johnny Depp in The Lone Ranger and the old Iron Eye Cody ad, who are two non-native men mind you, in cartoon depictions of indigenous folks, is probably the most mainstream media has done for positive native depiction. The gatekeeping and gaslighting are strong. No girl boss. In blockbusters, it often takes an explicitly POC movie to see ourselves crowned king. Sure, exceptions exist, but they are few and far between. Black, brown, indigenous, Latino, and Asian protagonists and stories shouldn't be limited to special events. The excitement for films like Black Panther is beautiful, but don't let the illusion fool you. The excitement is because there are so few diverse stories. We should celebrate these movies that uplift unheard, but equally important and entertaining voices, especially the projects that truly resonate with our communities. But most Hollywood casts still fail to empower POC, instead pushing them to the side, essentially for a quota. Most white roles don't need to be white. That's just been the default. Until 2022, female lead actor representation inched uninterruptedly near parity to male leads. And a number of these films have been game changers. To overshare to no one's detriment but my own, the newest addition to the female zeitgeist, Barbie, wasn't even on my radar when I started writing this script. God. Tired tropes and archetypes of female characters run rampant. Even in attempts to empower some characters, the influence of heterosexual men is easy to see. You would think narratively undermining approximately half of the population would be a difficult task. Before the 2010s, films seemed to unapologetically focus on cis men, defining women as bounties to be won or lost, obstacles to be avoided, or the token femme of the group. Despite female-led films still being disproportionately low, they are arguably at the forefront of my aforementioned contemporary pseudo-renaissance, occasionally reclaiming stereotypical depictions of women by flipping characteristics on their heads. Blockbuster studios have leaned into contemporary manifestations of feminism in an attempt to bolster their film's marketing or internal themes. And while there will always be a nuance to the relatively genderless portrayal of Ripley in the Alien franchise, from a writing perspective, it's not only important but refreshing to see women display a spectrum of femininity. When the movie is bad or divisive, this can certainly feel patronizing, but like we saw this summer, sometimes a film can cut through all sorts of barriers to completely shake up culture. Gal Gadot's portrayal of Wonder Woman definitely lined up in this archetype back in 2017, when her feature-length debut broke new ground. As a titular fantastic female, Diana is appropriately characterized as being equally as strong as, if not stronger than, her contemporaries in the good old Sausage League, while still exhibiting a lot of feminine characteristics. She's proper, maternal, stylish, and a historian. Not inherently feminine attributes, though what are, but in comparison to other female action stars, feels truly genuine to her character's perspective and emotional arc. Wonder Woman has been a paragon of these ideals of feminism, but it should not be the mold everyone seeks to replicate. Women should be seen as the vastly unique beings that they are. A woman can't be defined by a few stereotypes or characteristics. It's fun to have characters who challenge and play with their expectations for good and evil. If we want to foster a society in which young girls believe that they can be whatever they want, we should be empowering and sparking their fantasies of what they can be. In an equal measure, we need to not forget to have fun with these characters. Not every woman needs to be a role model. But that's only if the stories being told about them are advancing feminist narratives, directly or indirectly. But the genre is currently saturated with plots of female characters only gaining power in the face of male trauma. The YouTube channel The Take breaks down topical issues in the film and TV industry. In their video, Why Superheroine Movies Don't Empower Us All, they argue that many female-led superhero films like Wonder Woman still miss the mark despite paralleling values of second and third wave feminism. The Take points out how many of Diana's supposed feminist characteristics are diminished because her appreciation for the world of humans is framed almost solely from a group of men, and her love interest, who guides her into this strange new world, not only shares a similar line count, but becomes Diana's emotional and thematic resolution.
In the first film, after Diana's faith in humanity is destroyed and she doubts if humans deserve her help, Diana must choose which viewpoint to adopt. Steve's?
It's not about deserve. It's not.
Or her mother's?
Be careful in the world of men, Diana. They do not deserve you.
In the end, she chooses to listen to Steve.
It's not about deserve.
It's common for the female lead to have growth granted to her by a man, or even more frighteningly, for male trauma to be the catalyst of her abilities or learned growth. Stories of women breaking past representations of the patriarchy most certainly have a place in media, but when those are the only stories told, we limit our perception of female obstacles and conflicts. If the predominant conclusion to every female-led blockbuster is to defeat the big bad man at the end, we destroy avenues to exploring female characters' contest with issues that do not involve a man or deriving strength from within themselves. And that's not to diminish the impact of endlessly creative and hyper-feminist films like Barbie releasing in a contemporary setting. I love so many of these movies and know people with whom these narratives have resonated deeply. We should not see less of these stories being told, but there's a vacuum for other female narratives that are being ignored. Speaking of ignoring, I'm sorry for admitting the NBs and trans folk in the room until this point. They are wholly non-existent from the world of blockbusters. On screen, male and female characters exemplifying a range of gender performance accepted, especially for comedic purposes or to point out the irony. However, hardly any characters or actors who exist outside the constraints of the binary male and female have space on the screen. A lot of these concepts are new to the mainstream. Foreseeably, change could be in the near future, but to quietly assume and hope that roles will be given to the underprivileged would be to ignore industry trends. For queer people, the trend is getting switch invaded by massive blockbuster marketing. Numerous films such as Star Trek Beyond, Beauty and the Beast, Power Rangers, Black Panther Wakanda Forever, and Thor Love and Thunder in the lead up to the release announced the inclusion of the first openly gay X character. But queer and ally audiences have seen that the on-screen portrayals of these relationships can be shown in the constraints of the sentence. Between 1930 and 1968, queer relationships were strictly prohibited from the screen due to the implementation of the Hays Code, a means of maintaining the morality of films by banning certain depictions of violence, drug use, profanity, and sexuality, including interracial relationships and homosexuality. Since it was revoked, heterosexual stories have functioned as a core part of a character's journey to an objectifying side quest in many major studio films. And yet, gay and lesbian relationships are nearly invisible in blockbusters, lucky enough to give their partner a peck, much less learn to love and fight for one another. Major companies state that they are allies, but their less than middling depiction of gay people suggests hesitation to receive true backlash. Companies hope that in this way they can attract LGBTQIA+ filmgoers without fully alienating socially conservative communities or ruining their films for international censors. High-concept action films don't make up all of blockbusters though. Male same-sex relationships have been featured in biopics Bohemian Rhapsody and Rocketman, as well as rom-coms Love, Simon and Bros. Lesbian stories are infamously associated with foreign language art house pieces, and though they certainly have had a place in Western independent hits, Booksmart and Everything Everywhere, that is perhaps the closest we've gotten to lesbian blockbuster representation. The independent scene has been the world for thriving, dramatic, hilarious gay relationships. It shows the nuanced creative storytelling that has unfortunately been missing from more mainstream films. Somehow we have to lift up the talent behind these films, so Hollywood can hear they deserve to be the leading direction. And furthermore, need to be allowed to deliver unfiltered stories to the mainstream. It's important to remember that these films' problems don't exist within a vacuum. The combined depictions are what creates and reinforces tropes and stereotypes of marginalized characters. Although the representations we see on screen are not entirely reminiscent of the societies we live in, we can analyze the values of the producers in charge of choosing what content is seen. Furthermore, we can verbalize the distinction between the world that we live in and the worlds of the blockbusters we see depicted on screen through three social framework theories: assimilationist, pluralist, and multiculturalist theories. This set of theories was also used by sociologist Herman Gray in his book Watching Race to dissect black representation in sitcoms. But they serve just as well to evaluate and provide verbiage to depictions of marginalized communities in blockbuster films. First, the assimilationist theory is when the identities of cultural minorities are erased and are made out to be the same as the majority. This would be POC, female, or queer characters sliding into the world of dominant culture, straight white men, without any qualities of their identity. These include portrayals of characters who enjoy or are ignorant of their lower societal roles, as well as those who must blend in.
Me love you long time. Me so horny.
It is a broad framework, but represents the idea of showing a member of a marginalized group without any distinguishers of that group's existence and culture. Films nowadays tend to avoid these trappings. Next, the pluralist theory sees various backgrounds coexisting and adding to society without acknowledgement of the systems or societal values that exacerbate inequalities. Most blockbusters can be defined under this framework. This is the breeding ground for stereotypes in the sideline. A character's race, gender, or sexuality may be a key part of their character or even be referenced in jokes, but these characteristics exist in a vacuum from struggles that affect their communities. And finally, the multiculturalist theory applies to works that have an appreciation for cultural diversity and the struggle that society places on minorities to maintain their identities. The films that fit into these frameworks directly confront real-world inequalities, showcasing how struggles can affect many within a societal group. What's more, these stories explore the beauties of individuality and diversity, showcasing how these identities can make a person or community stronger. Now, if only there was a movie franchise helmed by a massive studio meant to parallel a similar society to our own, built of diverse people and strict political structures that represented the most general tastes of. Spanning the past 15 years with 33 feature films as of this release, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is a franchise unlike any other. With such a storied past, Marvel films have actively shifted with the current social climate, both correcting for past sins on and off screen, as well as attempting to pave the way forward for future storytellers. Nevertheless, as the peak of mainstream entertainment, its primary purpose is appealing to the widest audiences. So how does the MCU line up to these social theories? Marvel's early years are often criticized for the visually inconsistent recasting of Rhodey, aka War Machine, the Lovey Cheats, and Black Widow's sexed up introduction, as well as monstrous infertility. But the Avengers are far more woke now. They have Black Panther. Films like Black Panther, Captain Marvel, Shang-Chi, and Eternals make it tempting to slot the MCU into the multiculturalist framework. Like the theory defines, these four sub-series of the MCU actively address how these characters' diverse identities affect how they function within the larger society. Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings leans heavily into inspirations from martial arts films, includes Chinese mythological beasts, and makes jokes about existing as an Asian in America. Captain Marvel and Black Widow both serve as feminist allegories about defeating institutions linked to their disempowerment. Black Widow notably walks back many of her problematic characterizations.
And they rip out all of your reproductive organs. They just get right in there and they chop them all away. Everything out.
The Black Panther films directly tackle the issues of colonialism, reparations, and the importance of foreign relations. And The Eternals is not the best film, but it is about unity despite our differences, and highlights a wide spectrum of characters regarding gender, race, sexuality, and ability. Nevertheless, once we frame these characters in relation to their co-Avengers, their cultural identities begin to wane, and we see representations more in line with the pluralist framework. Characters like Nick Fury, Rhodey, and Sam Wilson are fairly far removed from their black identities, aside from music references.
Marvin Gaye, 1972 Trouble Man soundtrack. Everything you missed, jammed into one album.
I'll put it on the list.
And general black sassiness. In Captain America Civil War, we see Rhodey and Sam pitted against each other in an argument, most simply read as the two black sidekicks bicker to showcase the white hero's points. In a film that wants to be politically charged, this moment in particular ignores all of the nuances of two black soldiers in America arguing over who should control them. Generally, whenever race is not the main topic of a Marvel film, it's not handled deftly.
And my dad got deported, but I got the band.
Despite a legion of female superheroes, many are female versions of established heroes. And while
she's got help
is a nice showcase of the female talent and role models, it feels shallow when they are not seen impacting much else in the fight and are not given solo films about anything separate from their gender. And Marvel's list of gay film characters are limited to co-director of Avengers Endgame, Joe Russo, Bastos, Korg, America's Mothers, Annika, Ayo, and Valkyrie. There was more marketing discussion about these characters than portrayals of their homosexuality in the films.
The panel, Tessa Thompson mentioned that Valkyrie is going to be looking for her queen. So are we getting an LGBTQ friendly story in Thor 4, and how is that going to impact her story and journey?
The answer is yes. How it impacts the story remains to be seen.
Efforts to push Marvel into a world that fits the multiculturalist theory are diminished in the face of its history and depiction of marginalized characters. For a franchise that preaches everyone's ability to be a hero, it leaves a lot to be desired. Many of you likely noted my omission of any Marvel Disney Plus series, despite several being firmly centered within the multiculturalist framework. Shows like Falcon and the Winter Soldier or Ms. Marvel expand on the identities of marginalized characters with poor characterization, or introduce diverse heroes that will grace the theater screen later. Streaming and television shows cost less to make and target a more niche audience than their film counterparts, which correlates to more provocative, often liberal-minded content being trapped on the small screen. The original Star Trek made television history with the first on-screen interracial kiss, and contemporary sci-fi series like Doctor Who, DC's Legends of Tomorrow, and Supergirl have continued the tradition of dispelling the boundaries of what love means through explorations of the boundless possibilities found in our intergalactic world. Disney Plus Marvel shows have received a mixed bag of feedback, some justifiable and some not. The deep introspection of what it means for a black man to take up the mantle of Captain America felt like a genuine story that creators felt should be told, and on the other hand, Loki offhandedly remarking that he's been interested in
a bit of both
is laughably pandering and non-committal to depicting him as a queer character. And I'd be remiss to not note that Disney is known for rewriting the former sins of Star Wars in their television shows as well. Why can't these stories be told on the big screen? It's like streaming services and cable are just the nuclear testing ground for blockbuster diversity. Despite these same companies boasting about how great their representation is, the stories that truly dive deep into the lived experiences of marginalized communities are only shown to the audiences of television. And that's only if the experience is deemed safe enough to be shown in the first place. Despite declining interest, we are entering into a new stage of Marvel content, one far less homogenized than it was in the 2010s. And similarly, the drop in representation we've seen this past year has been countered by stories that place marginalized identities in the spotlight. But I hope this shows that there is plenty more that needs to be done in blockbusters before all people are seen as equal. We all need characters that reflect our differences, not just young audience members. We all deserve to see ourselves as brave, wicked, cunning, and kind. Too often are characters pigeonholed into the same archetypes because of long-held biases. What is there to do? Watch some independent films. Maybe you'll even find better ways to depict diverse characters. Fight for writer and actors' rights. We need to empower creators of all kinds in this industry known for not respecting the little guy, and keep pointing out what can be done better in blockbusters. That does not detract from the films that we love. It makes us more informed. Until then, it's the silent stereotypes.